Good afternoon. Welcome to seminar. It's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's speaker. Dr. David Williams is a long-standing member of our faculty. He joined our ranks in 1997 and spent the next 17 years establishing a very firm and solid and excellent reputation as a turf grass specialist. And then in 2014, he made a bold decision to venture into the unknown and become UK's point person on industrial hemp. And then 2 years later, he made yet another bold decision to become the director at the Robinson Center for Appalachian Resource Sustainability, AKA Quicksand. I checked in with David about a week ago to make sure that we were copacetic on the date and so on. And he told me that he was ready to rock the house. So I suggest that we respond in kind and give David a rocking welcome back to his home department.
No, there we go. That's better. Thank you, David, very much. Princeton, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. So I know almost everybody in the room, but there are a few I don't. I met one of our new faculty members when I walked in today. And this seminar is more aimed at newer faculty members than older existing faculty members. But I would offer that, and I don't want to put anybody necessarily on the spot, but I'm not sure what Dave or maybe Elisa or others that are well established here might know about what goes on at our station in Eastern Kentucky. This is not a normal seminar, and I have way too many slides. It'll be more like a movie than it will a normal seminar. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing I'll note is that, that's a little weird, but defining what Eastern Kentucky is clearly a subjective measure, right? So there's no border that says from this point on, it's Eastern Kentucky. And the same thing's true for Western Kentucky. What is Western Kentucky? It's a subjective line that somebody draws on a map similar to this one. So this map actually used for a grant proposal. So it's my attempt to identify what Eastern Kentucky is. So this green line that I've drawn here, and I think most folks would agree with what I've done. Maybe not Lewis County, but that's where our oldest granddaughter lives, so I included it for that reason. But I think most everybody would agree with the rest of it. And our station is located pretty much right smack in the middle of Breathitt County, which is right smack in the middle of Eastern Kentucky, essentially. All right, let's see if I can work this thing. Good. All right, so let's get oriented. Lexington, we're probably at this moment right close to the N in Lexington. And if you head east on I-64 to a little past Winchester, then east-southeast on the Mountain Parkway, past Stanton, past Slade, on to Campton, which is the county seat of Wolfe County, and then south on Highway 15, you'll eventually end up in Jackson, which is right here. So Jackson compared to Lexington. So here is 15 from Campton, and here is Jackson. Jackson is the county seat of Breathitt County. For a little bit of, so you can be thinking along the same lines here. Breathitt County is about 40% larger than Fayette County in area and has about 1/25 of the population. There are about 25 times more people in Fayette County than there are in Breathitt County. The population of Jackson is about 2,000. So if we head south on 15 from Jackson, just a very short piece. If you don't get stopped by these red lights here in Jackson, there are only 2 or 3 of them, you end up in a little community called Quicksand, which is where our main farm is located in Breathitt County. Now, I've backed out just a little bit here for a reason, but here's Jackson. and here's 15, here's quicksand. And so UK manages this property as a farm. It's kind of in a boomerang shape, and we'll learn more about that. This pointer thing is huge. It covers up the fields that I want to talk about. But we actually own this field. We own about 60 acres of this wooded area. We own this field, and we own a little tiny field on this road. And we own 451 acres of this wooded land here, as well as this little knob. Is JD here today? No, that's okay. So JD and the previous director were doing a kudzu study one time right here on this piece, and one of our neighbors came over and said, what are you doing here? Get off of my land. And I don't think JD's been back since, has he, Wade? Yeah, that's the last. So anyway, Jackson, quicksand. And so this is our farm, and this is a large area that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. Why do they call it quicksand? Of all things they could call it. Well, the community and the farm this is Robinson, this is 15, back to Jackson. And if you continue south onto Hazard, so turn in here on Robinson Road, which goes directly into our station. This is a bridge over the North Fork of the Kentucky River. It's right at the mouth or the confluence of the Quicksand Creek and the North Fork of the Kentucky River. So that little community became known as Quicksand a long, long time ago. It's very difficult to tell exactly when that happened. Jackson was incorporated in 1839, and as far as I know, quicksand has been around that long, if not longer. So quicksand has been well known for a long, long period of time. Why do they call it quicksand? This is a quote out of the Breathitt County history that the several forked Quicksand Creek became treacherous for residents and travelers alike. So you have to keep in mind that back in these days, there were no roads, or very few roads. And often travel was accomplished by using creek beds, as long as the water was low enough, you could accomplish that. And so that's why it could possibly be treacherous to travelers. This reminds me to note, there are only a couple of stock photos in this whole presentation. Everything else is from an archive that we maintain there at the station, or from current photos that either my wife or some of our staff have taken. So this is the North Fork of the Kentucky. Our little farm is over here. For those of you that are familiar with this part of the world, this would be Highway 15 on the way to Hazard. So we're actually grazing cattle over here. Now this is just a big giant road cut, a big cliff, but this is back in the 1920s. So this is the North Fork. And as you can see, the water was low this day, relatively speaking. I'm going to note that I grew up on a river, literally right on a river, about the same size. And so sands do shift in these types of rivers, and certainly in the Quicksand Creek, it would have been the same. But I think you can probably imagine that you could travel at least at some level along there if there were no other option. If there are no roads, it sure beats the dickens out of trying to travel up in here somewhere. So it was a very, very common thing to do. There are tales, I guess I'll say, that at the mouth of Quicksand Creek, and this is coincidental to this photograph, that perhaps there was a baptism ongoing, and a man approached from the other side of the creek, and the participants invited him to come join in, and he and his horse began to sink in the wet sand and eventually disappeared before they could save him, and that's why it was called quick. That seems a little unlikely. We'll never know, really, I don't think for sure, why it's called quicksand outside of what we've described thus far. All right, so quicksand is only really a small portion, or it's significant, but a small area portion of our activities in Eastern Kentucky. So let's get oriented again. So Jackson, quicksand, okay. Now, is there any attribute in that photo, and I'll ask those that already know not to answer, please, that might catch your eye or look unique or look special? Is there any attribute in that photo that catches your eye? Mind-made adventure. Mind-made adventure, okay, right. So It's down here, right? Yeah. Anything else? Okay, good. Well, let me ask you this. And once I point it out, let's see if it's as blatant as it always was to me. Can you see this kind of comma shape laying on its belly right here? Yeah. Does that look different? It's not a retouched photo. This is just Google whatever. It's darker green. Yeah, you can kind of see it. It shows up rather well. So that's the UK Robinson Forest. That's the UK Robinson Forest. The main block of the Robinson Forest encompasses 10,000 acres. And then we have some other outlying tracts that we'll talk about too. But Jackson, quicksand, and then we'll talk more about this, the main block of the Robinson Forest, which is a big, big part of UK CAFE efforts in eastern Kentucky. I include this. Let's back all the way out, then Google whatever, back to where Lexington is still in the map. You can still see that little green comma. So it is a very unique spot. It's very different than the surrounding geography and landscape. And that's a function of UK's management since its acquisition in the 1920s. In addition to quicksand and the forest, we own several outlying, what they call outlying tracts. This particular small piece of ground is about 200 acres in Knott County, and it's called the Stewart Farm, and it's bisected by Kentucky Highway 80. We don't utilize that land very well. There are some other outlying tracts that we may not utilize as well as we could, but most of our efforts are focused on quicksand and at the main block of the Robinson Forest and some other contiguous properties that we'll talk more about. All right, a little bit of history about the station and the forest, which, by the way, are concurrent, okay? They all happen together. It wasn't the farm first and the forest later or vice versa. It all came at the same point in time and by the same methods. So in the early 1900s, a Mr. Mowbray and a Mr. Robinson purchased a bunch of land in eastern Kentucky, way more than what we're talking about here, actually, from Mr. Miles Bach, who that later became Back. The Back family is still very prominent in Breathitt County. There's a back road, back drive in Quicksand, and there's a huge back cemetery at the top of the hill in Quicksand. So Mr. Back was very prominent in that time. So he sold all of this land to Mr. Mowbray and Mr. Robinson. They pretty much just clear cut it. We're talking tens of thousands of acres in eastern Kentucky that were clear cut in this operation, harvesting the timber. And the timber, the lumber, was sold all over the world. But a great deal of it went to the Singer Sewing Machine Company for the frames and the treadles of the day. So again, back in the early 1900s, but literally the lumber from this part of Kentucky went all over the world. So very, very large effort. Early on in that process, Mr. Bach also sold Mr. Robinson and Mowbray some land at Quicksand, and they established a sawmill there to process the logs that were being harvested from the surrounding region. And a little bit later on, Mr. Bach also donated a little bit of land to UK, a small amount, but all of this land, at least the forest and the station, were donated to UK about 12 years later in 1924. So that's all the time it took to harvest all that timber and process it and sell it. And there was really not much left except coal and gas and rock. And that's a slight exaggeration, but that's pretty much how it went. But so the station itself was established by the Kentucky General Assembly in 1924. Well, that's very washed out. Looks way better on my computer screen. This is Mr. Mowbray and Mr. Robinson at Quicksand, probably in the early 1920s at some point in time. We have some really cool old photos, like the real ones. So it's fascinating to see how this went. So these are photos of Quicksand. We haven't talked much yet about the bridge, but this is a bridge from what is now Kentucky 15, what was then, I guess, just a dirt road, across the North Fork of the river, Kentucky River, into quicksand. And it was a very, very large sawmill operation. And if you go to this ridge and look down, this would be the view you would see. So looking across the river here at the operation in quicksand. It's a large community where people were living and working. It was a major, major effort to process all of that timber that was harvested. And there are some accounts that it was the largest sawmill of its type, of its kind, in the world at that time. So it was a big, big effort. This is the first superintendent. Major Roger Jones was a combat veteran of World War I. This is Mr. Robinson, again, a very wealthy man by this time, maybe he was before, for all I know. I'm not sure who these guys are. I think this gentleman is C.H. Burridge, who was the first forester at the Robinson Forest, hired by Major Jones. And I don't know, I think I kind of a little bit look like him. Got the mustache, right, going, yeah. Oh, wait, maybe not. Well, maybe not. Well, if you dump the hemp and the clothes that I wear to stay out of the sun, it may not be as bad. I still, when I stomp around up there, I wear my pants and my boots and maybe look more like him than I think I do. So the Breathitt County Historical Society had a play last summer, and they asked me to play Major Jones in the play. And I had zero acting experience, but it was fun. I did that and had a good time. As you can see, it's a totally different experience than working in the plant science building. And I would offer in the most positive of ways. So the early charge of the station is to establish and maintain model farming operations. So in other words, use this land that we've donated for agricultural production and studies on reforestation, on how to reforest all the land that they'd harvested. And I guess it's okay for me to say, I'm being nice, like politically correct, when I say that we've harvested. I mean, you couldn't treat land like that now. It would be highly, highly illegal to do to the land but that was a different era. So we all understand that, I guess, but we're fortunate to have what we do today. So this is Major Jones's effort to get started, de-assembling or disassembling the sawmill and working on the site right there at Quicksand to get something going. They did take some of this timber. Correct me if this is not right, Wade. Wade's here, the farm manager. Some of this timber went into some buildings that we have today. The bull barn, we have a big bull barn that have bulls in it now, and a sheep barn that probably came from this timber when they disassembled this building. They couldn't disassemble it all. They burned a great deal of it just out of simplicity or necessity in order to get rid of all that mass. This part of this building from here back still exists on the station. It's still there today. And this is from the late 1920s. This photograph is. The front part of that building was called the clubhouse. There's the bridge coming across the river into the station, and was the office building and the kitchen. And I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. But so this is from back on the farm looking towards the river. And so thus far, we've pretty much been on the other side of the river looking in this direction. But this building, now we call it the bat barn, and for a good reason. It's full of bats and full of guano, and we try to store some equipment in there, but there's only one way in and out, and that's on this end, so it's really poor design for equipment storage, but we do use it for that. So they worked and worked and got the land worked to where we could start doing some research. And to this very day, when we work ground there, we find railroad spikes and other pieces of metal that were incident to this operation. So it's kind of cool to do that. So it was officially dedicated in September of 1925. I'll note that Mr. Robinson came for the dedication. The governor at the time, W.J. Fields, came. And then, of course, Dean Cooper came from UK for the dedication. There are probably many of you in this room may not understand the history of this part of UK's efforts, in other words, the ground that we're on right this very moment, used to be the UK farm. And yeah, so the Cooper House at the corner of Nicholasville and Cooper Drive is where Dean Cooper lived. And all of this land behind that, where the Good Barn is, for example, was the experimental farm way, way back in the day. And I don't know. So this is a little plug for this book. It's easy to find on Google or whatever this is, Amazon. It's kind of fascinating if you have any interest in what's gone on in the college for all these years. I really enjoyed that book. It was fun to read. All right, back to quicksand. So here is our bridge coming in. This is after all those buildings and the sawmill have been disassembled. So on the other side of the river, we have a really nice barn. We have some chicken houses, and you'll notice that there aren't very many trees left around there. It was a pretty thorough operation. And this is in the very, very early stages of the station becoming an actual research farm. I'm not 100% sure about this building. I'm thinking that Major Jones lived there. Wade, do you know? No, yeah. So they don't have a name for that building. I'm thinking that may have been his residence, at least for the first several years. But right after we got going, again, I'll note that, I mean, look at this hillside. This is across the other side of the river from the station. The river is right behind here, but you can see there aren't too many trees left, at least none of any size. So a very thorough harvest. But we began serving the public to essentially immediately, both youth and adults. And if we, let's see, yeah, if we go up on this ridge, at the top of this ridge, and look down, this is what we would see. And so here's the clubhouse and the building that still exists, and probably the major's home, and the fact that all this has been removed now and is ready for agricultural research. And we also own this across the river, this very nice barn. It's hard to imagine, Josh, isn't it, that's 15. So yeah, so we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. I would like to note that when we talk about agricultural research, we're not necessarily talking about production agriculture. We're not really necessarily talking about helping people grow stuff to sell, although clearly farmers will sell excess, right? Always have, always will. But the main thrust of these efforts were more related to sustenance agriculture. In other words, how can your family farm absolutely provide the best support and the healthiest support for you and your family? That was really the thrust of the efforts of UK in Eastern Kentucky. I will note that from the very beginning, and even still today, there's a huge effort in what old people called home economics, and nowadays we call family and consumer sciences. To this very day, we have a giant effort in that direction, and we always have since the station opened in the 1920s. Some of the early farm activities involved fruit trees, so they would bring fruit trees to demonstrate and actually share the genetics of these plants with local people to produce healthy, disease-free fruits for their diets. Again, that's the bridge coming from the other side of the North Fork. This kind of blows my mind. And there are many, many references to this. And again, all these photos are from Quicksand. These are not made up internet things. If a farmer brought a cow to the station would replace that cow with one of superior genetics. And I don't know what they did with the other cow, with hamburger. I'm not sure what happened to it. But I mean, today, that's phenomenal if you think about that. That's just crazy that UK would do that. If you bring in a hog, and they would replace that hog with one of superior genetics. You bring in a bushel of seed corn, they would replace that seed corn with superior genetics. So a giant, giant leap forward in at least the genetics of agriculture, both animal and plant agriculture in Eastern Kentucky, occurred very, very quickly as a result of the establishment of the station. Now, that's not to say that the corn genetics that were inherent there were poor, but we all know the advances in yield as a result of hybrid corn, right? So there's a whole lot more yield with a whole lot less effort with improved genetics. And so it was clearly a very, very positive thing. an illustration of the home economics or family and consumer sciences effort in the very early days, where we're talking about preserving food that's been grown on your farm, different fruits and how to sort and package them, all kinds of different seed crops that you might use for nutrition. And this photo is from the 1920s. This photo, I think, is probably from the 1940s. It wasn't labeled as far as the date goes, but again, food storage and gourds and tubers. And if you can read this, that actually this poster, 1 person, 1 year, 6 soups, 26 tomatoes, 2 carrots, 5 green beans or greens, 2 squash, 5, I can't read, peas, 42 variety fruits, 5 asparagus, 5 beans, 2 beets, 3 corn, and 20 meats would accommodate 1 person for 1 year. So I don't know who figured that out, but that's rather precise. Now, this might be one of the coolest things I can talk about today, and that's the Grow Breathitt County program, which is, until this year, 2018, a direct part of the Grow Appalachia program, which is funded by a really rich guy somewhere. I forget who it is. I should know that, and I don't. But it's a giant grant program all across Appalachia, not just in Kentucky. But the Breathitt County Extension Service has been a participant in that grant program for the last 2 years, at least, maybe longer, but at least the last 2 years. What is Grow Breathitt County? We invite up to 50 families, and we've always had at least that many, 50 families to participate. So there's an application process. Once accepted, we buy seed and materials to produce transplants for home gardens of appropriate species, like tomatoes and so forth, things that we don't normally grow from seed in the garden, right? And then we provide seed for things we do grow in the garden, like green beans, whatever, the list goes on. Multiple vegetables that we provide. So when I say we, our cars, I participate in this program through the Extension Office in Breathitt County. I ordered the stuff just a couple of weeks ago for this year's efforts. So 50 families in Breathitt County will get free vegetable stuff for their garden. Well, that's great, right? Well, so then they'll get training on the station. They'll have mandatory attendance meetings. If you sign up and you accept it, you have to come to the meetings, and we'll teach them how to grow gardens. That's wonderful, right? That's great. Well, that's not all. We have a truck and a trailer and a tractor and a tiller that will go to your house and till your garden for you. Yeah, no kidding. And then at the end of the year, we will give you a pressure cooker and a box of mason jars and have 2 classes on food preservation and teach you how to preserve the food that you produced in your garden. It's the coolest program I have ever been involved with in all of my time at UK. If you could participate, the children come to the meetings, they're excited to be there, they listen with great interest, they want to learn. It's the coolest thing I've ever been involved in. It's a wonderful, wonderful program. Let me note, now we're not talking about 100% people that can't feed themselves. That's not what this is about. Matter of fact, there's a retired, I guess the first ever 4-H agent in Breathitt County is retired, lives in Quicksand. How old is Jack Neese? He's got to be close to 90. Yeah. So he's not financially, in any kind of a fix. He participates in the program, not for the free stuff. He just likes to be part of the community. So it is a wonderful, wonderful program. And not really very different than what they did in the 1920s and 1940s. So I think that's very cool, and I'm happy to be a part of it. They also made a big, big deal out of child health back in the days. So bringing improved information, up-to-date information on how to keep children healthy. And that was also a very positive thing. This is a photo from 2016 from our field day, a group of nursing students from Hazard Community and Technical College doing exactly the same thing. And that same tent had a whole bunch of other booths in it about nutrition. And so children were getting information on eating right, staying healthy. So we have exactly the same efforts going on today as we did then. Well, I'm going to qualify all of that here as this goes on. So back in the day, they started having what you and I would call a field day. They called them harvest festivals. And the station and all of these activities became an integral part of the community and really of the region, not just of Jackson and Breathitt County, but of the whole region. A huge event and very, very well attended. And I don't have a lot of information on this other than to mention it a couple of times, but they did have, I think it could have been a precursor to 4-H or somehow involved with 4-H, but they had agriculture camps for children where you send your kid to Quicksand for 2 or 4 weeks and they would receive instruction on farming and instruction on health issues and so forth. And so kind of a youth focused program. So here's a program from one of the early field days. And I just love looking at these. So the governor came to this, he was governor from 23 to 27. So, you know, you're not hopping into a blacked out Chevy, whatever those things are, Tahoes or whatever, and zipping from Frankfort to Jackson. You know, you're getting on a train and riding, I'm assuming, probably all day to get from Frankfort to Quicksand or Jackson. So it's a big, big deal. The dean, of course, was there, a big part of it. And right after the dean spoke, we had a hog calling contest for men and a chicken calling contest for women. Yeah, no, we don't do that anymore. But well, we could, but we don't do that anymore. But I mean, this is the real deal, and it was very, very highly regarded. So then, maybe a year later, President McVeigh from UK came, and we had a ballad singing contest, a mule contest, which I don't know what that was exactly. I'm guessing not unlike a dog show, right? But I guess there wasn't much of this. But, you know, mules are a very, very important part of agriculture prior to tractors. They're far more utilitarian than horses in many applications. So having a good mule was very important to have a productive farm. So it made all the sense in the world to make a big deal out of that. Fiddling, string bands, and you'll see here, announcements and winners and child health. So they had a contest for following healthy procedures with your children to promote, you know, good child health situations. So very well attended from all around. Most of these animals are mules, not all of them, a couple of horses, but you know, even before cars were common, very, very highly attended. There's our bridge again, coming across the North Fork, and a truckload of folks coming, no telling from where, but right there on the farm. For those of you that are familiar with the station at any level, this would be heading out towards where the Wood Center is now. So we still farm this land. We still do plot research on this land. Very, very well attended. All these folks learning how to grow field corn. This photograph, if you colored it, could have been from 2016, except we don't have, as I've mentioned, this building, this part of this building is gone. This building is here. And this is exactly where we have our field day today. So it's pretty much exactly the same thing. I'm thinking that this is from the 1930s based on those cars. This photograph wasn't labeled. There's some young folks coming for ag camp. They've got their stuff with them. They used to actually stay in that, what we call the bat barn today. It was like a dormitory facility and a kitchen facility in the clubhouse, the building in front of that no longer exists, to feed all those children and camp participants. A little bit of activity there on the station with children, some kind of a play, I guess, but you know, these guys are like little farmers and these young ladies are like little milkmaids with buckets, and I don't know exactly what's going on, but the bottom line is this: it was a giant, giant part of the community. I mean, it was an integral part of the community. UK and the Quicksand Station was very, very important. And I would offer that it's the same today. And I'll give a couple of examples as to why I say that. Here's another photo from probably the 1940s. And these young ladies are sporting their ribbons from the Harvest Festival. So they won something. So maybe nothing spectacular about that photo in particular, except this young lady eventually became Mrs. Williams. No relation to me, but definitely relation to this fella. It's his mother Yeah. So this is Irwin Williams and Neva Williams, both in the room here. So Irwin and Neva live at the Robinson Forest and take care of the Robinson Forest. So they're UK R-CARS employees. And Irwin's mom was a big participant in all this early quicksand stuff when she was a child. It's a big, big deal, and it still is. It still is, and I'll illustrate that a little further here. All right, let's talk a little bit about the forest then. That's all farm stuff. So I've already mentioned that the main block of the forest is about 10,000 acres. We have about 5,000 or so in outlying tracts. The first headquarter of the forest was built in 1928 on the Little Buckhorn Creek, and that doesn't mean anything, but it will soon enough. The first camp, or in other words, you can come here and stay and work, was built in 1933 by the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was that effort by the federal government to allay the effects of the Great Depression. In other words, provide jobs to people that couldn't find jobs otherwise. That camp is gone. It was constructed in what's today known as the Engineer Bottom along the Little Buckhorn Creek, and was first used by UK's Department of Civil Engineering here on campus. That would send people there for some period of time, and they would do engineering work, civil engineering work, all throughout the Robinson Forest as training. So undergraduates in civil engineering here at UK had to go to the Robinson Forest and do their time there. That camp's gone. It was, I think, torn down, I think, sometime in the 60s or early 70s. The current camp, which we'll talk a little more about, built on the Clemens Fork beginning in 1939, and there was a little delay with World War II, completed in 1954 by the National Youth Association, which is a very similar situation to the CCC, just with younger people. And the forest, all these years, has been managed by the Robinson Station. So Major Jones initially, the first forester hired by Major Jones was C.H. Burridge. And that remained the case until UK formed a Department of Forestry in '69 and up into the early 70s. So prior to that time, the experiment station managed all of that. Okay, a couple of points I want to make here again. So let's get oriented. Jackson, quicksand, here's the big comma, the main block of the Robinson Forest. Even today, by today's standards, this is remote. Yeah, I mean, if you're at the forest, you're probably, well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say you're not running out for a gallon of milk, but now there's a store. They just now built a new gas station and store right at the end of one of the roads. So it's not too big a deal now like it used to be, but this is remote. Irwin and Neva live at the camp, and they've noted that when the camp is empty, when there's no one there using it, and it's dark, you hear weird things. Yeah, it is way, way out there. It's very remote. So by Google or whatever maps, whatever you use to figure out how far something away is. So if you go from here to Jackson, it's 26.1 miles. So before cars, you know, if you lived in that part of the world and you had to go to Jackson, I mean, so if a mule could make 4 miles an hour, that's like a 6-hour trip, right? Well, people did live there. This is labeled 1928, abandoned cabin on the RF, on the Robinson Forest. So somebody lived there when Mr. Robinson bought the property and harvested all the timber, an old cabin. Now, none of this came from Lowe's. And so it's all from right there. It has the dog walk in the middle, like a lot of old cabins did. But it's hard to imagine that's remote. That is remote. 6 hours to Jackson by mule. It's fascinating. How did they live there? They actually plowed ground on these ridges. Today, you can go there and find piles of rock where each year they would plow, they would knock more rock up, and they would pick those up and put them in a pile. And UK archaeology, anthropology has been there many times. We can find these rock piles today where these folks lived in this country. To me, that's fascinating. When you talk about folks in Appalachia, not just Eastern Kentucky, but Appalachia, tend to be very independent people. Well, for pity's sakes, on Sunday, if you're 6 hours from Jackson, you better be independent, right? I mean, there's no other way to live than that. So I found that very, very fascinating. That's a photo of the first headquarters on the Little Buckhorn Creek, built by the College of Engineering at UK in the 1930s. That's a photo of a young man actually holding a measuring stick and participating. This is a photo of some of the first forestry-related research on the property. This is in Little Millseed, Irwin, and this is a temporary building constructed there for water research or creek water research. Little Millseed is one of the smaller creeks in the forest. And what's, I think, most striking to me, I mean, I don't know how big that building is, but if that's an 8-foot door, and we kind of extrapolate from that to that, I would guess maybe 20 feet. And you look how big this tree is, not much bigger than 20 feet, and it's about the same size as all the rest of those. They're very young trees. You don't see any honkers in that stand. So that's right smack in the middle of the Robinson Forest. So they really did, they harvested well. They took out pretty much all of it. Okay, let's step forward then into what's going on more today. They began a horticulture effort actually from Princeton. Somebody from Princeton that contributed to the early horticulture efforts in Quicksand. Those efforts continue today. The Wood Utilization Center, which was designed to train people in wood technology, wood use technology. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It was established in '63. We have a graduate of the program in the room. We'll talk more about that. My wife's oldest brother attended the program from Breathitt County. Coincidental to me being up here talking about it today. The program ended in '82, was fired up again in '95, but lasted only a few years. And we're trying today, we're trying to get it started again in collaboration with the Hazard Community College. So this whole outfit remained the Robinson Station, often, as David noted, referred to as Quicksand, until the creation of the Robinson Center for Appalachian Resource Sustainability. That's a really long name for a substation of the experiment station system, but it's also abbreviated RCARS. So yeah, RCARS. So the first director of the RCARS was David Ditch. David Ditch was a member of our department. He was a forage guy, really trained as a soil scientist, but worked a lot in forages. Ray, did you ever work with David in it? Yeah. So, and David retired in December of 2015, and I started there in April of 2016. All right, a more modern picture. Is Matt here? I invited Matt. Matt Barton. So you don't have to climb ridges anymore to get pictures. You email Matt Barton, and he brings a drone. And you say, go over there and take a picture. Yeah. So it's way better than having to climb those ridges. So this is a photo from this past summer, from Matt Barton and AgCom. So here's the bridge coming over. Here's that old building that's original to the station. This is what's called the program office. It's populated by extension and forestry, SNAP Ed, or that's supplemental nutrition assistance program education. So in the School of Human and Environmental Sciences, we have Tom Keene keeps an office in the building. We have Districts 1 and 2 administration are housed in that building, and some other miscellaneous folks too. This little building and these 4 buildings are actually remnant of a relationship with the federal government. USDA used to have what was called a plant materials center at Quicksand. And unfortunately, not sure how this happened, but it did. So the federal government used to own all of this. UK gave it to them, and they still own all of this right here, and including these buildings. So we have to file a report to the Department of Education, every year to tell them what we're doing with this property. So I don't know I'm not going to dwell on that. It's a little upsetting. But I had mentioned this boomerang shape. So we own around this way and around this way, and I'll be a little more precise in a minute. So offices, this is storage and storage. This is our chemical building, and clearly plot land in both directions that way. So then if we come back out a little bit and look at, we also own and we crop this field. This is Kentucky Highway 30. So we call this the field on 30. This field is on the South Fork Road, so this is the first South Fork field. We own this field as well. This field's been cropped by Josh McGrath for the last couple of years, and as far as I know, he intends to crop it this year as well. Some phosphorus utilization research, different formulations and different placements, and how that affects yield and movement of phosphorus in the soil. Let's see, over here is Sean Wright's horticultural efforts. Sean does a bunch of different stuff with all kinds of vegetables and fruits, and 100% pertinent to Eastern Kentucky, no goofy things. But this year, at the very end of that piece of land, we are going to have a hops variety trial. So hops variety trial, we're excited about that. That's kind of cool. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. Okay, so here's the office building. So if we come around, there's that old building that's original to the station. Come around this way, there's the Wood Utilization Center. We'll look at that more closely. This is an orchard that we own and maintain, and still a source of scion wood for locals to come and do grafting work. The plot land, of course, this is mostly Gene Olson's forage variety trials in this part, and that actually goes on back a little bit, and we crop all that land too. We're very happy this past year to have Bob Pierce and Colin Fisher back on the farm after a several-year hiatus from tobacco. This is in the field on 30. Colin and Bob were doing work because of our barn is small and easy to manipulate. And so they've manipulated our barn so that they can measure the effects of curing techniques on the accumulation of TSNAs. And so we're very happy to have them back on the farm. A little bit of chia. We've been working with Tim Phillips on chia. I think those are selection, aren't they, Tim? Yeah, selection fields. And we've done that for the past couple of years as well. David already mentioned my work's in industrial hemp. So there's hemp stuff. And even if you're not from Eastern Kentucky, you may or may not have heard that cannabis does really, really well in that part of the state, as clearly illustrated by these plants. So Rob Hounchel and David Neese and Jared Abner, and then our farm manager, Wade Turner, harvesting some industrial hemp that's part of our program. We also grow a few of those funky plants. I'm just going to leave that definition right where it is. There's probably no hemp research at Quicksand, I don't think. No hemp research until 2016. And even then it was small, so much bigger last year, much bigger this coming year. All of that ended up in that. Now, how weird is that? That's just odd, right? Yeah, I know. Yeah, but it's not that bad. 100% of that material went to Joe Chappelle in pharmaceutical sciences, and it's actually funded by the Igniting Research Collaboration Fund here at UK, and it's real stuff. It's hard to get past that though, and it's also hard to get past what it smells like. Okay. This is the Wood Utilization Center. So built in the early 1960s. The first building here is mostly offices, bathrooms, and classrooms, and then the rest of it is a giant wood shop that it has every, at least as far as I can tell, any potential machine that you could ever use in woodworking exists in this building. And we're very fortunate to have a person that understands all of them. Mr. Dorn Howard is a master craftsman, I think, by any measure. 36th year, I think, at the center. So it's the only job Dorn's ever had. And he is extremely good at not only building things, but he's also extremely good at working with the public. And sometimes, this is Bob Ammerman. Bob is an extension associate in secondary wood products in the Department of Forestry. And he has a lot of extension stuff going on at the center in cooperation with Doran. So a lot of work going on there. This is our website. And if you click on the wood products catalog, Doran provides all of the staff awards. If you get something wooden as a staff award, that's where it came from. Doran made it. And then he makes all kinds of other stuff too. Occasionally, not near as often as we'd like, he gets to make something cool, something different, something real, besides just, a little plaque thing that's not really very complicated. And it's fun to watch him do that. All right, let's move on up to the forest real quick and get finished up. What UK does at the forest is pretty phenomenal. This is an aerial view, another Matt Barton drone view of the camp at the forest as it exists today. That's an old sawmill. That's our shop, classrooms. I'm sorry, that's a drive-in shed. That's where Irwin and Neva live, and a classroom, an office, the dining hall, and these are the cabins where people stay. And that's a bathhouse, much like you would see at any state park today. So these cabins, again, were built in the late 1930s, mostly out of chestnut trees that were dying of chestnut blight at the time. And they're still original. They've been repaired, of course. That's a long time ago, but they are still original. They're kind of bunkhouse style, so that's becoming less and less popular, or maybe even tolerable in these days and time. And we're kind of working on that as time goes by. There's the coolest fire pit ever, right in the center of the camp. As I understand, it's been there since the camp has, if that could talk, right? The stories it could probably tell. There's the dining hall in action. There, yeah, right there is Mrs. Williams, Neva Williams. I never could find Irwin in this photo. I guess he's back in the kitchen washing dishes. But in the calendar year 2017, Mr. and Mrs. Williams prepared and provided over 4,100 meals in that building and accommodated over 1,100 overnight stays at individuals at the camp. So it's a major operation there. Our Cars is also responsible for the infrastructure in the forest. We have about 80 miles total of roads, and roads is a term I use very loosely. They're not, some of them are paths, but they're ways to get from one spot to another, and we definitely have some challenges there. I need to mention very quickly, this is the forest manager, Chris Osborne. He's an employee of the Department of Forestry. Today was his last day. He went on to industry, so we're have an interim situation going on there. Going to miss Chris horribly. He's a great guy. The most touristy thing to do at the forest is go to the fire tower. It was built at the same time in the 1930s. It's 100 feet, 99 actually, and the views from the tower are just phenomenal. They really are. You can see a long, long way in all directions. The views from the ground are equally phenomenal, at least in my opinion. If you're into natural stuff, it's just one of the most beautiful places on Earth. It's why that comma can be seen from space. It's really, well, space, the Google thing, whatever it is. So, that's one of Matt's photos, Matt Barton, AgCom. That my wife took that photo one day on the Coles Fork. That's a quick photo on the Clemens Fork Creek. The biodiversity there is just phenomenal to see. My wife took all of these photos except that one. That's one I took, and that is this knife, right? So about 3 inches or whatever. So that's a black bear print, and there were others with it. That was Mom, I guess, and the kids were there with it too. All right, so let's talk quickly about what forestry does there. This is just a screenshot of their website, their research area website. They do have a wide variety of things going on. And what's really cool about the forest relative to research is that they pretty much totally own and manage 2 complete watersheds, 2 separate and complete watersheds. And so this is the camp. That's the little up the hill to the fire tower. This is the Clemens Fork watershed, and this is the Coles Fork watershed. And not 100% of the Coles Fork watershed exists in the main block, but most of it does. And what doesn't, we still have a little bit of control over what happens there. So that just provides phenomenal opportunities for watershed research. Really, it's almost unmatched anywhere. It's just an opportunity in Appalachia that doesn't exist anywhere else. And so they've installed what they call weirs, which are permanent concrete fixtures, and less permanent flumes, little metal, and the geometry of these devices, I don't understand it, but allows them to measure the flow of water, and they have data back to the 1970s. To the 1970s, at the inception of the Department of Forestry. So it's one of the broadest databases in the world for watershed management. Really cool. They do fantastic research there. It is fascinating. So sitting here in this room every Friday, I didn't have any idea what might be going on in the forestry department. Now I do. And I have a deep, deep appreciation for what our colleagues are doing, not only at the Robinson Forest, but here in the Cooper building as well. It's a whole different world, and it's really, really fascinating. This particular study done in the early 2000s literally changed the laws all across Appalachia on how logging is performed near waterways. So what kind of a crossing you build across a creek or even an ephemeral stream. how close you can harvest, how much you can harvest, how close, you know, the on and on. This work defined that law. So very, very important work. This is more recent. Just this last fall, as a matter of fact, we all work at the North Farm, right? We go out there and lay out plots, right? How would you like to lay out 1 acre plots in that kind of terrain? Yeah, so Chris Osborne and some others helping him lay these 1 acre circles out on the side of the hill, way, way, way out in the very, very back of the forest. And that's to study the effects of these harvest principles on bat populations. Lots of bats there. Okay, real quick, some work that Tom's been doing. This is a tract of the forest called the Laurel Fork, and you can see it looks different. It was mined in the early 1990s by UK. They mined it, so now it's reclaimed mine land. Many of our colleagues in this department did work there for many, many, many years. Mike Collins did a lot of work there. Dick Barnheisel was a soil clay mineralogist, did a lot of work there, and some others in our department as well. About 3 or 4 years ago, David Ditch, Pat Kaiser, and Tom Keene, and I guess Ray was involved as well, installed some native warm season grass pastures, four 20-acre pastures, and for the last 3 years, we've been grazing calves and measuring the effects of these grass mixtures. And you can see that, you know, we're not talking about Kentucky bluegrass style pastures. It's tough to grow things on this land. It's not the highest quality soil. So local producers, in this case, this is Larry Clay from the D&D Ranch in Chavez in Perry County. He is a cowboy, I mean like a real cowboy, came from New Mexico and Texas. The D&D Ranch is, I don't even know, it's 10,000 acres, or it's huge, it's thousands of acres. It's a giant cattle operation. We would be lost without them. They were imperative for the success of that research, helping us get the cattle out. Then another project on the property, just last February, our RCARS crew built, I don't remember how many little square areas that forestry can plant trees inside, and this keeps the elk out. So they're measuring the effects of herbivory, natural herbivory, on reforestation. That might seem like a no-brainer, but like everything else, you have to quantify it, right? You have to put a number to it. So that might not sound like too big a deal, but that's rock. I mean, it doesn't look like it, but can you imagine installing an 8-foot fence in reclaimed mine land? If you've ever seen it, you would not want to do it. All right, we're going to finish up here real quick. This is us, our crew, getting ready for our Pumpkin Day. In 2016, we all wear orange shirts, so we have a couple of thousand young children, not quite that many, 1,000 probably, that visit the station over a 2-day period. And we want them to be able to see who to run to if something goes wrong or they're lost or whatever. So we all wear orange shirts. Let me note real quick while this is up here. Barb Stamper is the person that keeps our place going clean, does a great job. Francis Lacey working in the office, our office manager, Jackie Allen. I know I'm going to leave people out. Mike is our fleet manager, an extremely creative guy as well. We've already talked about Irwin and Neva. This guy's from KSU. We don't see much of him anymore, but we see him occasionally. He's a Hort guy from KSU, and I think we've mentioned the rest of those folks. So this is a Pumpkin Day back in the 1930s, right? That's Pumpkin Day in the 1930s. This is Pumpkin Day in 2016. Yeah, it's still good. It's still good. It's still highly appreciated. It's still a big deal to the community. I mean, how do you beat that? Yeah, so this is where I want to mention very quickly. You go to the North Farm, there's a big sign there that says cameras in use, federal regulations prohibit entry. And you come to this UK experiment station and it says welcome. I mean, it's just a totally, when I first went there and I walked by the front door of my office and there are people like almost pretty much out in our plots. What's my intention is to run out there and say, can I help you? You know, that's what we do at the North Farm, right? It's totally different, right? We're right smack in the middle of a community, and we love being right smack in the middle of a community. It's a totally different UK culture, totally different than what we're accustomed to in Central Kentucky. And again, I offer in the most positive of ways. A photo of our field day in 2016. We do count for extension purposes, so a little over 2,500 contacts in the 4-day period that year. That's a lot of people. It's still well attended. That's the same spot where all those cars were parked in 1920, exactly the same spot. And we're not talking old people like me that had nothing better to do. We're talking about young people are interested in these activities. So that's very important these days. It makes a big, big difference. We have and enjoy and appreciate strong administrative support. We all recognize Dr. Bennett and Drew Graham from the College of Ag and the Commissioner of Agriculture, Ryan Corals, paid a visit. Dr. Cox made time to come to field day. She asked, what can she do? Well, if you can help us make these kale smoothies from about 9 to 11, when you get done with that, we'll find something else to throw at you. Yeah. So we appreciate her support too. 2017, past year, we had our first field day ever at the Robinson Forest in cooperation with the Department of Forestry. That was a lot of fun. We teach children how to handle copperheads safely. That's not a copperhead, it's a corn snake. Yeah, that's a corn snake. Yeah, or what to do if you step on a crawdad. Yeah, that's the Clemens Fork. The Clemens Fork run by the camp there, one of the watersheds we own and manage, is a reference stream for the whole country. It's some of the cleanest water in the country because we own and manage it, and it's just the coolest thing ever. It really is. We had adult activities too. Okay, so one of the things on my front burner these days, this is a great illustration, is we're not just agriculture. We're not just about growing stuff. We're not just about animals. Action/ecotourism already exists at a large pace in Eastern Kentucky. And we would like to understand that and maybe grow that a little bit more. I mentioned that we own, there's quicksand again, we own a big part of this. And right here on the edge of this road, there's an old house site. It's where that big barn was, right? Many, many years ago, where that big barn was, right across the road from where Josh McGrath works. We are applying for grant money to establish a visitor center there and potentially develop that 450 acres behind the visitor center with maybe mountain bike trails or maybe equine trails. And so it's a very small effort, but the visitor center would serve all of Eastern Kentucky. It would be a collaborative effort with Kentucky State Parks, with Kentucky Division of Fish and Wildlife, and any other public or private effort in ecotourism in Eastern Kentucky. So we're working hard to get that going. What does that have to do with production agriculture? Absolutely nothing, but it's a lot of fun. I'm just about done here. This is close to the end. I could not be happier to be working over there. So I'm going to mention quickly, I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. So the culture where I grew up is far, far more similar to the culture in Breathitt County than it is the culture in Central Kentucky. I've lived here for many, many years, so been a big part of both, right? Where I grew up and what you're used to here in Central Kentucky. The folks that I work with in Breathitt County and at Quicksand, it's not exactly the same as where I grew up, but far, far more similar than where we live or where we are today. It's just a lot of fun to work with them. I'll give you a couple of examples. Again, here's the Quicksand, but this road that goes to Jackson and then back to Hazard is Kentucky 15. It's not Hazard Road, right? Like this is Kentucky 27, but it's Nicholasville Road, right? Yeah. So I appreciate that. It's 15. It's not Hazard Road. It's called by what it is. This is another great example. This is a photo from Neva Williams. What do you call those? Hornets? What else might you call them? Wasps, right? Well, where I grew up, we call them waspers. We call them waspers. So part of my job at the station, I have budget responsibilities, right? So I have to review all the purchases and whatnot. I couldn't be happier than the day I got this one. Yeah. Yeah. It's exactly the same way I talk. Exactly the same way that I talk. So I couldn't be happier to be there. This is one last slide. This is my car. Yeah, and this is the door into my office. And in the wintertime, it's kind of dark. Yeah, so, and not only is that where I park, but when I pull up, there's the photo cell and a motion detector, the light comes on. So who has that? Right? Not even the dean has that. So it's a wonderful place to work. I absolutely love it there. Well, I'll skip that and just go straight to this. I'm past time. So I'll be happy to try to answer any questions if you don't have to run.
Questions for David?
Yes, Dave.
Besides wood products, is there much agricultural income except for sustenance?
So most of the agricultural income is from beef. That would be the highest income producer. And then secondly, it would be just farmers market sales, I would guess. And we do have an active farmers market. Several counties around us have active farmers markets. So people do grow specifically to sell at farmers markets. No other questions?
What about moonshine? Is that still?
Moonshine.
Still a factor about
The other
those hills?
cash crop.
So I actually had originally